Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. So, Bentham starts out talking about this, and he's got the basic idea now that, okay, we're interested in consequences of pain, consequences of pleasure. The propensity to lead to pain is negative utility. The propensity to lead to pleasure is positive utility. These can cancel each other out. So something is particularly painful but also particularly pleasurable. It could have like a zero or neutral value overall. You can add pleasures up, and if you add more pleasures in, it becomes better. You can take pleasures away, it becomes worse. Likewise with pains, you can add more pains, it becomes worse. You can take pains away, and it becomes better. So how do we do this in sort of real life situations? Well, Bentham says there's four main things that you can look at, first off, right off the bat, with any pain or pleasure. And one of them is what he's going to call intensity, or its value. So we'll just use the term intensity. And what you have to be able to do with this is give the pain or the pleasure a number value. Let's just keep it really simple, and we'll say we can give it from 1 to 10, because I think you guys are used to doing that, rating things in terms of 1 to 10. Or, 1 star to 5 stars or something like that. Let's use 1 to 10. How many of you have been in, not necessarily the hospital, but maybe a clinic, or, well, those of you who are athletes, you got hurt, and you had a trainer come up to you, and one of the things they ask you is, okay, your pain, on a scale from 1 to 10, what is that pain? And you say, oh, it's an 8. And they say, 8 being really bad. It's a 2. Not bad at all, not bothering me that much. It's kind of hard to figure out, isn't it? But the more that you thought about it, if you got into a lot of situations like that, do you think you'd get better with rating these sorts of things? Probably. And you could probably look at people in pain, and we show pain differently, I know. Some of us are more stoic, some of us are kind of wussies about it. But you can look at a person, you can say, yeah, they're in a lot of pain, they're in less pain. You can rate them against each other. So one of the numbers that we have to come up with is the intensity. What about pleasures? If I gave you an assignment, which I'm not going to do, I already give you enough assignments. If I gave you an assignment to sort of take all the pleasures in your life and put them into a scale and rank them in relation to each other, it would be tough, I think, for some of them. But could you do it? Would you be able to do it if you had, a little bit of time on your hands? Like, let's say we take a few examples. What kind of candy do you guys like? Twizzlers. Twizzlers? Okay. The rest of you like Twizzlers more or less? Not the black ones, but the red ones, yeah. Not a lot of people like black licorice, including me. I don't like it. So eating a Twizzler, a single Twizzler, when do you usually eat Twizzlers? You go to the movies, okay. Now, you have a single Twizzler, you have going to the movies, and I understand it would really depend on a lot of circumstances, like is it a good movie, is it a bad movie? Let's say it's a good movie you really like. And it's in a nice theater, so no feet sticking to the floor or anything like that. Your seat is actually comfortable. There's not a lot of people talking while you're watching the movie. Nobody's sitting in front of you with a hat, anything like that. So we got a very small level of pleasure, movie. What's a big pleasure? Something you really, really enjoy? Something that maybe even motivates your life. How about spending time with the people that you like the most? All of you have some friends or some family that you like the most, right? Your top 3 people. Only those people. None of the people that bother you. I understand that sometimes if you want to be involved with some of the people you like, you got to be involved with people that you don't like too. Let's say that's not the case. So you've got like 3 different levels. What number would you give to the single Twizzler for intensity? Maybe a 1, right? If you gave somebody a whole bag of Twizzlers, maybe that would be a 2. Maybe, a single Twizzler is 1, and then you add another one. It's not as good as the first Twizzler, right? Candy's never as good, the more you eat it. The first taste is better than all the rest. What number would you give to the being together with all your friends? Let's say for a long time, nothing on the horizon keeping you from spending time with them. 8, a 9? What would you give a 10 to? Is there anything you could give a 10 to? If you're a drug addict, you'd give probably that drug a 10. But, hopefully that's not going to be an issue. Is there anything else that could compare to that? It's worth thinking about. What about the middle thing, the movie? Seeing a really good movie, what number would you give it? Can't be a 1, can't be a 8 or 9. What would you give it? Six? 5? What do you think? How many would give it a 4? Nobody? How many would give it a 5? How many would give it a 6? So it looks like 6 is probably where, maybe we'd give it a 5.5, right? You can do a decimal scale if you want to. The next thing that comes up that would affect this would be duration. How long does the pleasure last? Now let's think about the Twizzler thing again. How long does the pleasure of eating a single licorice Twizzler feasibly last? I mean, you could probably make it last a long time if you absolutely had to. If you were in prison and you only got that one Twizzler once a day, you would probably not wolf it down, would you? You'd savor it. But how, realistically speaking, how much time do you think that Twizzler is giving you pleasure? Yeah.
Just as long as you're chewing it.
Yeah. How long do you think that might take? I mean, we could actually objectively measure this. We could put people down, give them a Twizzler, and just watch them. Maybe a minute, 2 minutes. Not even. It depends. I mean, somebody might nurse it along for half an hour, but they're really getting into that Twizzler then. The movie. You know how long the movie is. Is there enjoyment after the movie too? You think? Yeah, because you remember it, and so that would. Do you sit down and remember that really good Twizzler that you had? Probably not. You could. You're right. What about the being together with good friends? That could last your whole life, or it could be a weekend. I mean, would it be better to spend time with your friends over an entire week or just a weekend?
Weekend, for sure.
You would rather have a weekend rather than a week with your good friends? Let's say there's no other.
It might be too much after a couple of days. It's like, all right.
Ah, yeah. Well, then you would be introducing some other considerations, which we'll come to. So duration is important. What else? Probability or certainty. Now this is an interesting one. If you go and get yourself a pack of Twizzlers, could there be something wrong with the pack? Could something have gotten into the mix and it doesn't taste like cherry or strawberry? I think that's what the red ones taste like, more or less, right? And instead taste like spinach. That could happen. Not pretty likely, though, is it? Or they mixed it up and it's got the black licorice flavor. How many of you like black licorice? Anybody in here like it? How many of you find it disgusting? Okay, so there's a small, tiny possibility that red licorice actually has black licorice in it, and they just changed the coloring, but it's not very likely at all. Now let's think about a movie. You haven't actually seen the movie. You've heard that it's good. You know that movies of a certain genre you like to watch. You know some of the stars in the movie, and they're people that you enjoy watching. Would you give a 99% probability to it being a good movie, or 80%, or 60%? What would you give? It's hard to tell, isn't it? You'd have to pick some number, though, in order to make this work. Now the spending time with your friends. Yeah, maybe if you were going to spend time with them for a week, maybe there is a chance that they would get on your nerves. Yeah, so maybe actually the weekend with a shorter duration but a higher certainty of enjoyment is the better bet. Maybe that has a higher total utility. The other thing that he talks about, which I'm not going to talk much about, is what he calls propinquity or nearness. And Bentham thinks that we should prefer pleasures that are close by. We should give them a higher rating than we do pleasures that are far off, and likewise with pains. That's a bit debatable, and I'm not going to worry about that, but I put it up there for consistency's sake. He talks about two other things, too. He talks about purity and fecundity, but what those really boil down to, the purity of a pleasure is the degree to which that pleasure is not accompanied by other pains. So, to use the example of eating too much, it's fun to eat too much, right? At least while you're doing the eating. But typically, it's a mixed pleasure, right? Because your stomach's going to hurt afterwards, and you might feel sluggish, or you might actually feel upset with yourself for eating so much, right? Losing your temper might be pleasurable at first, but it brings about pains, and even anger is a mixed pain and pleasure at the same time. Fecundity is the likelihood of producing further pleasures. If you did get together with your friends for a weekend, that's pleasant by itself. Let's say your friends are pretty smart people. Do you think more pleasant things might come out of it, like opportunities to get together again? Well, that would be fecundity. But you can treat that as a separate pleasure or pain. The other thing that really matters is extent. How many people? Are affected. And if you want to determine whether a given action, a given policy, a given way of doing things is the right thing to do or not, you not only have to look at how much pleasure or pain is generated, with all these factors, you have to look at how many people are affected. So if you could, for example, and this is kind of a silly one, but let's say you could give 1 million people a bag of Twizzlers. And let's say these are 1 million people in the third world. So a lot of these people, don't get Twizzlers very often. And, may not even have eaten that day. Probably giving them sugar, straight sugar is not the right thing to do. But let's say they'd enjoy it, right? You could give 1 million people Twizzlers, and each one, would have a fairly small intensity of pleasure. It wouldn't go on for an awful long time, but you can be pretty sure they'd be happy with it. There'd be some people, let's say 99%, because there's going to be some persons, I don't want Twizzlers, I wanted Skittles, And then, where's the pleasure? It's right in front of them. Let's say we oppose that to, in order for the Twizzler company to give you these 1 million bags of Twizzlers, they say that you need to poison some random stranger. Not kill them, just make them real sick for like a week, like gut-wrenchingly sick. Now that's a pretty intense pain, right? And it goes on for a week. That's a lot longer than the pleasure coming from the bag of Twizzlers. And let's say that whatever it is that you're going to give them, it's 100% guaranteed to make them sick. So, really good certainty. They're going to get sick right away. And now, here's where the extent comes in. It's only one person. They're going to be in a lot of pain. They're not going to be very happy about this. And maybe some other pains come out too. They have to miss work, so that causes them other hassles. Their spouse thinks that they're literally belly aching about nothing because they don't know that they've been poisoned. We can draw all sorts of things. But it's 1 million people as opposed to one. And you're making each of those 1 million people a little bit happier. You're only making one person miserable. Wouldn't that balance, wouldn't all that pleasure for that extent of people balance out that, in the long run, small amount of pain that you're giving to that other person? If you say yes to that, you're a utilitarian. If you say no to that, it's probably because you think there's something off about that, and you may be able to put your finger on it right now, or you may not be. But if you say no to that, you're not a utilitarian. You're something else. If you think that it's wrong to poison one person and produce some pain for them, even though it would produce an awful lot of pleasure, way more pleasure than pain for a great extent of people, then you have some other basis on which you're making your decisions than what Bentham is talking about. And we'll explore those as the semester goes on. Let's say you are a utilitarian now. How do you calculate this out? Well, for any given action, you have to look at the pains and pleasures that would be created by it. So let's say there's one pleasure and one pain. We'll make it really, really simple, and it affects 5 people. You have to tally up what that pleasure would be for each of these things, and you can multiply them. Like you can multiply the intensity by the duration, by the certainty, by the nearness, and come up with some number. Coming up with the numbers is kind of tricky, but you can figure it out as you go along. And then you have to multiply it by the number of people who are actually affected by it. So let's change a little bit. Now we have 5 people. We'll use the classic trolley problem. Are you guys familiar with this one? So there's a trolley. It's said in a lot of different ways. There's a trolley, and it's running along, and there's phrased in a bunch of different ways. I'm going to choose this one. There are 5 people on the trolley. And if the trolley goes off the course, these people are going to die. It's going really, really fast. Faster than a trolley should go. Right? But there's somebody on the tracks. And if the trolley keeps on going, it's going to flatten that person, kill them on the spot. You're in control of the trolley. You have a lever that will actually send the trolley going in a different direction. Would you do it? Or would you allow that one person to die? I mean, think about this. If you actually sent it off the tracks, I'm actually changing the thing a little bit too to make it a bit more extreme. You'd be hurting more people, wouldn't you? But you would be, if you let it go on, you'd be allowing a person to be hurt, killed. And that could have repercussions. That could affect their family, other people. Maybe people are watching. They're like, oh my God, this awful thing happened today. So it could create a lot of pain. But it wouldn't create as much pain because of the extent. A utilitarian is going to take the greater number usually and try to save them. Lifeboat problems are similar too. If you have a lifeboat and you can only save so many people, there's actually 2 lifeboat problems. Who do you save, first of all? And then do you if other people want to come on board, but it creates the chance that the lifeboat's going to sink, do you let them or do you push them away? Well, that has to do with calculating outcomes, calculating pains and pleasures that are likely from something. If you could save, let's say we make a lifeboat thing. You got 20 people in the lifeboat, and there's somebody who's trying to get on board. And if that person gets on board, that lifeboat is likely to capsize. Not guaranteed, but likely. You're the only person who's actually well enough to keep them from getting on board. Do you hit them with the oar? Knock them back into the water? Well, a utilitarian would probably say yes. Because, again, the greater extent is going to outweigh a lot of this stuff. But this is what you would have to do. You'd have to figure out each pain and pleasure caused by this action, and then figure out how many people it applies to, and then come up with a total for that. And then you'd have to look at the alternate possibilities, the alternate actions that could be taken, and what the pains and pleasures caused for them would be, and how you tally those up. So that's, what I'm giving you in this worksheet is a way to do that fairly easily. If you were going to do this, there might only be 2 pains and pleasures involved. There might be more than fits on the worksheet, And it does require you to come up with some sort of numbers, which is one of the tricky things about utilitarianism. One way you could come up with numbers is to look at all these things in terms of dollar values. How much would you pay for a given pleasure? If you had a completely rational universe, then what you pay for a particular pleasure would seem to fit that, wouldn't it? If a pleasure is worth $50, it must be 50 times as good as a pleasure that you pay $1 for in some way. Does that make sense to do it that way? Pains. How much would a person have to pay you to endure a certain kind of pain? You could carry something out like that, yeah.
But that wouldn't make it universal for everyone. That would just make it very.
Yeah, that is one of the issues with this. Bentham is assuming that people are more or less similar when it comes to this kind of stuff. And maybe you could deal with it by averaging it out or something. That is a problem with utilitarian calculation. There's a lot, when you start probing this, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with this moral theory. But on the surface, which is what I'm trying to present to you here, it looks pretty straightforward, doesn't it? It looks like you can reduce morality down to a bunch of calculations. So let's take a concrete example. Yeah, because we have a little bit of time. Let me pick one of the examples that I can. Let's take a really simple one. How many of you have brothers and sisters? Almost all of them, okay. Is it fair for a parent, and those of you who don't have brothers and sisters, you've got cousins, you can do this sort of thing. Is it fair for a parent to favor one child systematically over the other children? Because, it could be because that child needs more, could be because they want to reward that child for doing better. Let's make it really simple. We'll put it just in terms of affection, not like material support or something like that. So this will be our problem. Is it moral for a parent to favor one child? How many children should we have? Just 2 children or 3 children? 3, okay. So one child out of 3 with much more affection. And if you want to come up with reasons why, they just happen to like that kid more. Now, what does your gut tell you about this right off the bat? Could you make the case that this could be a good thing, or at least a permissible thing, or do you think it's wrong?
It's wrong.
How many of you think it's wrong? Is there anybody who thinks that, they're the parent, they get to decide, it's their house, there wouldn't be anything wrong with it? Nobody? Why do you feel that it would be wrong? What is it? Again, just going from your gut, not necessarily doing Bentham's calculation. Why does it strike you as being wrong? I think you're right. Why do you think it's wrong? I'm sure you have some sense. If you had to explain this to somebody else, if you were sitting here, now you're an adult, and your brother and sister-in-law is doing this sort of thing, and you're actually saying, hey, that isn't right. What would you say to them? Yeah.
It might affect how the child will act when they grow up and how they act towards other people.
Okay, that's a good one. So, consequences for for the favored child, right?
For both.
Okay,
I was
so,
gonna say like a negative consequence for the child that's not. Yeah.
down the line. So outside of the immediate situation. Yeah, we'll come back to that. That's a really good consideration there. Why else do you think it would be bad? Yeah.
Because I guess it might be, all the children all deserve the same love and affection that they should have. They all
Yeah.
have.
So there's a question of equally deserving of affection. And you know how we often talk about this? We would say that it's not fair, right? That's one of our basic moral concepts, is fairness. Yeah.
It might turn the siblings on each other.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. Produces conflict. Let's take the immediate situation. How do the kids that are being not favored, how do they feel? Yeah.
They feel bad, and also they might not put like their full potential into something that like they should. Or,
In the present.
yeah.
Okay.
Neglect.
So some of the kids feel bad. And I think this would be a separate consideration. They may screw up in the present. I'll just put it in those terms. Okay, so we have a lot of stuff here to work with. And you notice when you're put on the spot to think in moral terms, you guys can pretty well. You feel a little reticent about it at first, but once we get the ball rolling, a lot of different considerations come out. Now, could we think of these in terms of pains and pleasures? Consequences, good consequences, bad consequences. Some of these definitely we could do right for the present, right? So let's say we think about the pain that the kids feel, the ones who are being treated badly, in the present. And I'm not actually going to put all the stuff about intensity and all that up on the board. Let's just see if we can come up with a raw number. We'll pull it out of the air. How bad is it? Let's say this is a constant practice. If you want to give a number to it, what sort of number should we give to the pain that the kids feel because they're actually being deprived of affection? We're not even worrying about fairness at this point, just the fact that they need affection and they're not getting it. What kind of number would, yeah?
7.
Okay, let's call that a 7. And we have 3 kids. We'll leave the parents out of it just to keep it simple. So we have kid A, kid B, and kid C. And we'll make kid A the favored kid. So kid B and kid C already have -7. So that's on the side of pain. Now, the other kid is getting a lot of affection. So if we're doing kind of a balance sheet like this, how much more affection are they getting? Let's say it's a positive 7. Right? They're getting the affection that the other kids aren't. Already it's starting to look like a bad deal, isn't it? Overall. Now let's add in the extra thing due to unfairness. Everybody in the situation knows it's unfair. Does that bother people? How much pain should we say is caused by that? Okay. So a -5, -5. Do you think kid A feels the same sense of unfairness to it? Maybe less, because they're not so directly affected.
I don't know that he is aware.
Let's say they're not. They're oblivious. Everybody's so nice in this house, you know, because they're walking around without that. In fairness, conflict produces conflict between the kids. How should we value that? That might actually be a positive. Maybe the kids that are on the short end of the stick actually feel a little bit better when they're in conflict with theirs. Should we give that a positive value? What do you think? Or should we give everybody a negative value for conflict? What would you say? How do you feel about conflict? When you get in conflict with your siblings, is it all painful to you, or do you feel good about some of it? Yeah.
It might make them feel good at the time, but afterwards, it's
Oh.
probably negative.
Okay, so we could actually split that into two things. Let's say we give it a positive value. How much positive value would we give to kid B and kid C for, like, sticking it to the favorite, just in the present? Enough to outweigh the affection they're not getting, do you think? No? So something less.
Maybe 2 or 3.
2 or 3, okay. So plus 2, and then, of course, the kid A doesn't really like it. Let's say they really don't like it. And now long-term, you're right. So let's say there's long-term negative effects for all of them. Should we give that a 2 as well? -2, maybe? What about the long-term consequences for the kids? The kids who are treated without affection, who are unloved, probably going to have worse outcomes, right? How should we value that, do you think?
A 9 or an 8.
Does that sound good? 9 or an 8? I mean, it's more than the immediate loss of affection. So let's say -9. We know this actually by all these sociological studies that, for instance, daughters need fathers involved in their life and not just sitting there in the chair, but actually actively engaged, and sons to a somewhat lesser extent. There's social scientific research about this. What about kid A? If they're getting tons of affection, probably things should turn out better for them, shouldn't they? So let's say it's positive. Let's say it's +18. It actually outweighs that. Now, and I know we could go a lot further with this, but I just want to do this so we can look at it overall. How do things turn out for this kid overall? Well, +16. So actually, it's a winning proposition for that kid to get more affection, isn't it? If they were just deciding on their basis, the way kids often do, yeah, love me, forget them. What about these other kids? Well, if we tally it up, these two cancel each other out. You got 8, -17, and -17. It's worse, slightly worse, for either one of these two kids in the long run than it is for this kid. And there's 2 of these kids, only 1 of this kid. So it ends up, saying you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be unfair in the way that you apportion your affection. You shouldn't play favorites from a utilitarian perspective. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting though. What if you switched things around and you had 2 favorites and one kid who was like the bad kid of the family and got no affection and was picked on? And let's say the numbers are exactly the same, so that it turns out +16, +16, -17, then it starts to look like it has positive utility, doesn't it? It starts to look like that would be an okay thing to do. Now you could also compare that against, like treating all the kids the same, and you'd have to have some sort of baseline for that as well. But you see one of the issues here with utilitarianism. If you start changing these numbers, if some things do affect some people more and some people less, then the solution can end up changing too. Something that could be, you probably shouldn't do it, can turn into, yeah, we should do it, because it generates more pleasure than pain overall for the community of people involved. So there's a lot of issues with doing things this way. Like I said, though, it does have the benefit of being fairly easy to predict, doesn't it? You could actually turn everything into numbers. Are these numbers perfect, accurate representations of what these hypothetical children would feel? Probably not, but could we make them better, do you think? If we did some scientific studies of human motivation? I'm willing to bet we could. So this is one way in which we can try to calculate pleasures and pains.